The warm, stale air inside the USS Sea Dragon hung heavy with tension as 23-year-old pharmacist's mate first-class wheeler B. Lipes stared down at the makeshift operating table, really just the wardroom mess table, where 19-year-old seaman first-class Darrell Dean Rector lay unconscious. Sweat beaded on Lipes's forehead as he held the scalpel above the young sailor's abdomen. The date was September 11, 1942. The submarine was cruising at 120 feet below the surface of the South China Sea, deep in Japanese-controlled waters. "God help me," Lipes whispered, knowing he was about to attempt something no one in his position had ever tried before. Around him, the submarine's officers watched in tense silence as the young medic prepared to perform an appendectomy with kitchen spoons, a tea strainer, and a few basic medical instruments. No submarine carried a doctor in 1942, and the nearest Allied medical facility was thousands of miles away. The metallic tang of antiseptic mingled with the submarine's perpetual bouquet of diesel fuel, sweat, and machinery oil. The gentle hum of electric motors and the occasional ping of expanding metal were the only sounds besides Rector's shallow breathing. Every man present knew they were witnessing history, though none could predict how this desperate gamble would transform submarine medicine for generations to come. Rector would die without surgery. That much was certain. His appendix was about to burst, spreading deadly infection throughout his abdomen. But if Lipes failed in this desperate attempt, he would be responsible for killing a shipmate. No one in the 21st Submarine Squadron knew that a Navy corpsman's bold decision that morning would not only save a life, but would fundamentally change how the Navy approached emergency medicine for decades to come. 3 days earlier, Rector had approached Lipes complaining of abdominal pain. At first, the young pharmacist's mate thought it might be a simple stomachache or perhaps gallbladder issues, but as the hours passed, Rector's symptoms worsened dramatically. His fever climbed, his abdomen grew rigid to the touch, and he began to curl his right leg upward to relieve the intense pain, all classic signs of acute appendicitis. By September 11th, Lipes knew with grim certainty that without emergency surgery, the young sailor from Kansas would be dead within hours. The familiar face of Rector, known throughout the boat for his easy smile and willingness to take on the toughest jobs, had become a mask of agony. Pale and sweating, he could barely speak above a whisper as the pain intensified. For Lipes, this wasn't just a medical case. This was his shipmate, a young man who had shared meals, stood watches, and survived enemy attacks alongside him. Lipes had never performed surgery before. No corpsman had. It wasn't permitted under Navy regulations, and attempting such a procedure could end his career, if not result in a court-martial. But as the Sea Dragon patrolled in enemy waters, there was no chance of reaching a medical facility in time. The choice was stark and simple: watch a shipmate die or attempt the impossible. As Lieutenant Commander William E. Farrall, the submarine's commanding officer, weighed this terrible dilemma, he asked a question that would echo through submarine service history. "Lipes, can you do this?" The young pharmacist's mate's answer would change everything. "Sir, I can't fire this torpedo and miss," Lipes replied, "but if you order me to do the operation, I will certainly do it." The gravity of the moment wasn't lost on anyone present. In the confines of a submarine, where 55 men lived in intimate proximity for months at a time, the bonds between shipmates transcended ordinary friendship. Every man aboard was essential to the survival of all. Losing one meant not just a personal tragedy, but potentially compromising the submarine's ability to complete its mission and return home safely. No one aboard the Sea Dragon that morning could have known that the events unfolding in that cramped wardroom would become one of the most extraordinary tales of medical heroism in the annals of World War II. Wheeler Bryson Lipes was born on July 12, 1920, in Newcastle, Virginia, a small town nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The son of a railroad worker, young Wheeler had never expected to become a submarine medic, much less to make medical history. As a 16-year-old high school dropout in 1936, Leipz had joined the Navy seeking adventure and opportunity, both in short supply during the Great Depression. Just a hillbilly who wants to get away from the hills, maybe fight a few Japanese and see the world, Leipz reportedly told friends as he boarded the bus that would take him to Navy training. The irony that he would one day be fighting to save rather than take lives and become a nationwide hero for it would not be lost on him in later years. His childhood had been marked by the poverty and hardship that characterized rural America in the 20s and early 30s. Like many young men of his generation, he saw the military as a pathway to a better life, offering steady pay, meals, and the chance to learn a trade. The Navy, with its promise of exotic ports and far-flung adventures, held particular appeal for a boy who had never ventured far from the Virginia mountains. The Navy's training program for hospital corpsmen in the 1930s and early 40s was rigorous, but focused primarily on emergency first aid, basic nursing skills, and preventative medicine, not complex surgical procedures. After completing the hospital corpsman course at the Naval Hospital in San Diego, Leipz served at Philadelphia Naval Hospital, where he developed expertise as a laboratory technician and electrocardiographer. Most importantly, he had observed several appendectomies performed by Navy surgeons, though he had never conducted such an operation himself. Leipz was an exceptional student, absorbing medical knowledge with remarkable speed despite his limited formal education. His superiors noted his quick intelligence and steady hands, qualities that would serve him well under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. One surgeon, in particular, Lieutenant Commander Carey M. Smith, took a special interest in the promising young corpsman. On Leiph's last day before transferring to submarine duty, Smith called him into his office for a farewell conversation that would prove prophetic. "If you ever have to do an appendectomy," the surgeon told him, "this is how you do it." He then walked Leipz through the procedure step by step, not imagining the young corpsman would ever actually perform one, but recognizing the value of thorough preparation for the unexpected. In 1941, as war clouds gathered over the Pacific, Leipz volunteered for submarine duty, seeking greater challenge and adventure. Few corpsmen chose the submarine service willingly. The claustrophobic conditions, extended deployments, and heightened danger made it one of the most stressful assignments in the Navy. But Leipz thrived in this environment, quickly qualifying as a submarine sailor aboard the USS Sealion. Life aboard submarines demanded a special temperament, the ability to remain calm in crisis, to work efficiently in cramped conditions, and to endure long periods of isolation from the outside world. Submariners developed an intense pride in their service, considering themselves an elite brotherhood. The submarine force's unofficial motto, "We dive so others may live," spoke to their willingness to take extraordinary risks in service to their country. Fate intervened on December 10, 1941, just 3 days after Pearl Harbor, when Japanese aircraft attacked the Cavite Navy Yard in the Philippines. The Sealion was sunk at her moorings, but Leipz survived. With the Sealion's sister ship, USS Sea Dragon, damaged but repairable, and in need of a pharmacist's mate after her own corpsman was wounded, Leipz found himself assigned to a new submarine, the vessel where he would make history. The attack had been brutal and unexpected. As Japanese bombs rained down on the naval yard, shrapnel tore through ships and facilities, killing and wounding dozens. Leipz later recalled diving into Manila Bay as explosions erupted around him, swimming through oil-slicked water as the sky filled with smoke and flames. It was his first taste of combat, a baptism by fire that would forge his resolve and prepare him for the challenges ahead. Leipz joined a submarine force that was woefully unprepared for the realities of wartime medicine. In 1942, submarines typically carried only one medical professional, a pharmacist's mate with limited training. Surgical procedures more complex than suturing wounds were unheard of aboard submarines. The Navy's prevailing attitude was that serious medical emergencies at sea would result either in emergency evacuation to a surface vessel or, more likely, death. The submarine medical kit of that era was rudimentary by modern standards: bandages, sulfa powder, morphine syrettes, and basic medications. Submarines carried no blood or plasma for transfusions, no oxygen for respiratory support, and certainly no surgical instruments beyond what might be needed for minor procedures. The expectation was simple: keep the crew healthy through preventative measures, treat minor ailments and injuries, and pray nothing serious happened while on patrol. The Navy never imagined we'd be performing major surgery underwater, Lipes would later recall. That wasn't part of our training. We were supposed to handle routine illnesses, minor injuries, and keep the crew healthy. Anything more serious was considered beyond our capabilities. This approach reflected the harsh realities of submarine warfare. In the early days of World War II, 1 in 5 American submarines never returned from patrol. With such high casualty rates, the Navy focused its medical resources on surface vessels and shore facilities, where they could benefit the greatest number of sailors. Submarines, operating alone in enemy waters, were expected to be largely self-sufficient, a policy that would be tested to its limits on the Sea Dragon's 4th war patrol. Yet as the war intensified, American submarines found themselves operating farther from friendly bases, conducting extended patrols lasting 50 or 60 days in enemy-controlled waters. Evacuation was often impossible. This reality created a dangerous gap in medical care that would be tragically exposed on the Sea Dragon's 4th war patrol in September 1942. By the time the Sea Dragon departed Australia on that fateful patrol, the Pacific War was entering its 9th month. American forces had scored a decisive victory at Midway in June, but the Japanese still controlled vast swaths of the western Pacific. The submarine force was taking the fight directly to the enemy, conducting daring raids on shipping lanes that supplied Japan's war machine. For the 55 men aboard the Sea Dragon, these patrols meant weeks of monotony punctuated by moments of extreme danger. Life aboard a fleet submarine was uncomfortable at best. The air grew increasingly foul as a patrol progressed. Temperatures in the engine rooms could reach 120 degrees, while humidity hovered near 100%. Fresh food ran out after a few weeks, leaving the crew to subsist on canned goods. Privacy was non-existent, with sailors sharing bunks in shifts. The Gato-class submarine that Lipes called home was 312 feet long, but just 16 feet wide at its widest point. Men learned to move sideways through narrow passageways, ducking under pipes and around machinery. Personal space was measured in inches, not feet. Each sailor was allotted a small locker for all his possessions, and a bunk that he likely shared with someone on the opposite watch rotation. Water was severely rationed. One sailor famously described submarine hygiene as taking a bath with a damp rag and a bar of soap. The distinctive submarine smell, a pungent mixture of diesel fuel, sweat, cooking odors, cigarette smoke, and machinery, permeated everything and everyone aboard. After a few weeks at sea, even the bread baked in the submarine's small galley would taste of diesel. In this environment, morale and crew cohesion were essential. Every man needed to trust his shipmates implicitly. For Lipes, this meant building relationships with each sailor, understanding their medical needs and concerns, and being ready to respond to any emergency. Little did he know how severely that trust would be tested. The Sea Dragon was patrolling near Indochina in the South China Sea, nearly 2,000 miles from the nearest Allied base, when Seaman Rector first reported to Lipes on September 8, 1942. "Doc, I don't feel so good," the young sailor said, using the traditional nickname given to all Navy corpsmen. "My stomach's killing me." Darrell Dean Rector had celebrated his 19th birthday just days before falling ill, a milestone marked with little fanfare, given the submarine's operational status. A farm boy from Kansas, Rector had enlisted in the Navy seeking, like Lipes, adventure and escape from the limited opportunities of his hometown. Tall, lanky, and good-natured, He had quickly become popular among the Sea Dragon's crew for his unfailing optimism and work ethic. Initially, Lipes suspected a simple stomachache, possibly from the canned food that made up most of their diet by that point in the patrol. He advised Rector to rest in his bunk and kept him under observation. But as the day progressed, Lipes noticed alarming changes. Rector's temperature began to rise. His abdomen became increasingly rigid and tender to the touch. The pain, initially general, began to localize to the lower right quadrant of his abdomen. As a pharmacist's mate, Lipes had been trained to recognize appendicitis, though he had never expected to diagnose it in such isolated circumstances. The classic progression of symptoms, pain that begins around the navel and migrates to the lower right abdomen, fever, loss of appetite, nausea, left little doubt in his mind. By the second day, Rector was experiencing rebound tenderness, pain that intensified when pressure on the abdomen was suddenly released, a nearly definitive sign of inflammation. Lipes applied ice packs to Rector's abdomen, administered what pain medication he could, and restricted him to a liquid diet, standard conservative measures for appendicitis. But he knew these were merely stopgap measures. Without surgery to remove the infected appendix, Rector's condition would inevitably worsen. By the morning of September 10th, Lipes was deeply concerned. He reported Rector's condition to Lieutenant Commander Ferrall, explaining that he believed the young sailor was suffering from appendicitis. The submarine commander faced an impossible choice. They were in enemy waters, far from friendly ports or medical facilities. Surfacing to attempt an evacuation would expose the submarine to Japanese aircraft and vessels. Yet without surgery, Rector would almost certainly die. Ferrall, a Naval Academy graduate and seasoned submarine officer, understood the enormous weight of the decision before him. Every captain dreaded losing men on patrol, but he also recognized the risks of attempting a surgical procedure never before performed aboard a submarine. He consulted with his executive officer, Lieutenant Norval Ward, and the ship's engineering officer, Lieutenant Emil Specht, seeking their input while maintaining the calm demeanor expected of a commanding officer. Through the night of September 10th and into the morning of the 11th, Rector's condition deteriorated rapidly. His fever spiked, his pain intensified, and Lipes recognized the telltale signs that the appendix was on the verge of rupturing. Once that happened, bacteria would spill into Rector's abdominal cavity, causing peritonitis, a potentially fatal inflammation. His temperature kept rising, Lipes later recalled. He had the classic symptoms of appendicitis. The abdominal muscles were getting that washboard rigidity. He then began to flex his right leg up on his abdomen to get some relief. The signs were unmistakable and ominous. Without intervention, sepsis and death would follow within hours or days. Ferrall and his executive officer, Lieutenant Norval G. Ward, went to Rector's bunk to assess the situation themselves. Despite his agony, the 19-year-old sailor remained calm when told of his predicament. "Whatever Doc Lipes wants to do is okay with me," he reportedly said, placing his life in the hands of a pharmacist's mate just 4 years his senior. This moment of trust, of one young man literally placing his life in another's hands, exemplified the bonds that formed among submariners. In the confined space of a submarine, where every man depended on his shipmates for survival, relationships developed an intensity and depth rarely experienced in civilian life or even on surface vessels. Rector's calm acceptance of his fate and his confidence in Lipes spoke volumes about the culture of the silent service. The commanding officer then summoned Lipes to his tiny cabin for a frank discussion. "What are you going to do?" Ferrall asked. Initially, Lipes responded, "Nothing," aware that performing surgery exceeded his authority and training. But as they discussed Rector's rapidly declining condition, both men realized that inaction meant certain death. Ferrall, a seasoned submarine commander who understood the burden of command decisions, drew a powerful parallel that would change Lipes's thinking. "I'm out here every day, and my job is to sink enemy ships," he told the young corpsman. "I fire torpedoes, and sometimes I miss, but I keep at it because that's my job." The message was clear. Sometimes duty required taking enormous risks. Sometimes following regulations meant death, while breaking them meant life. In that moment, Lipes made his decision. "Sir, I can't fire this torpedo." "And miss," he replied, "but if you order me to do the operation, I will certainly do it." With those words, Lipes accepted perhaps the most daunting responsibility ever shouldered by a pharmacist's mate. He would attempt a major surgical procedure with minimal training, improvised instruments, and no backup. If he failed, a shipmate would die by his hand. If he succeeded, he might face professional censure or even court-martial upon return. Yet the alternative, standing by while Rector succumbed to a treatable condition, was unthinkable. With Farrell's nod of assent, preparations began immediately. The Sea Dragon's wardroom, normally where officers took their meals and relaxed, would become an operating theater. The submarine descended to 120 feet to provide the most stable platform possible. Lipes selected his makeshift surgical team from the crew, choosing men he trusted to remain calm under pressure. Lieutenant Emil Specht would serve as first assistant, helping to retract tissues and tie sutures. Lieutenant Nelson, the communications officer, would administer the ether anesthesia under Lipes's direction. Several other officers would stand by to assist as needed. Each man understood the gravity of what they were about to attempt and the potential consequences of failure. Throughout the submarine, word spread quickly about the impending operation. Men who weren't directly involved found reasons to be near the wardroom, ready to help if called upon. Some prayed silently. Others busied themselves with routine tasks, trying not to think about what was happening to their shipmate. The Sea Dragon fell unusually quiet as the crew awaited news of Rector's fate. The challenges were enormous. The wardroom table, bolted to the deck, would serve as the operating table, but it was too short for the 6-foot-tall Rector. Lipes ingeniously solved this problem by pulling out a drawer in a nearby cabinet to support the patient's feet. With no autoclave for sterilization, instruments were boiled in water, while alcohol normally used for the torpedo's gyroscopes sterilized gloves and the pajamas that would serve as surgical gowns. Lipes's improvisation extended to creating surgical instruments from everyday items. Tablespoons with handles bent backward would function as retractors to hold open the incision. A tea strainer covered with gauze became an anesthesia mask for administering ether, a substance not normally permitted aboard submarines due to its flammability, but which Lipes had presciently brought aboard. Nothing about this was by the book, Lipes would later recall. "We were making it up as we went along, using every bit of knowledge and creativity we had. The stakes couldn't have been higher." The submarine's limited medical supplies were inventoried and prepared. Lipes had 12 hemostats, clamps for blood vessels, a packet of scalpel blades with a hemostat to serve as a handle, commercially sterilized gauze pads, and catgut sutures. For lighting, the crew rigged a battle lantern to illuminate the operating field. For antiseptics, Lipes had alcohol and iodine. It wasn't much compared to a proper operating room, but it would have to suffice. Even the position of the submarine itself was crucial. Farrell ordered the boat to a depth of 120 feet, where the sea was calmest, to minimize any movement that might jeopardize the delicate procedure. He also ordered absolute silence throughout the vessel, no unnecessary activity or noise that might distract the surgical team. Every aspect of the submarine's operations was subordinated to the task of saving Rector's life. At 11:30 in the morning on September 11, 1942, the operation began. Lieutenant Edward Knowles, the Sea Dragon's communications officer, administered the ether, following Lipes's careful instructions on the drip method. With the makeshift surgical team watching in tense silence, Lipes made his initial incision through Rector's skin, then carefully worked his way through layers of muscle and fascia. The atmosphere in the wardroom was taut with concentration. Sweat dripped from Lipes's forehead as he worked, occasionally wiped away by an assistant. The only sounds were Lipes's quiet instructions to his team, the soft clink of instruments, and the steady, reassuring hum of the submarine's electric motors. The first major challenge came when Lipes couldn't locate Rector's appendix in its normal position. This anatomical variation could have spelled disaster, but Lipes methodically continued his exploration, eventually finding the inflamed organ behind the cecum adhered at its distal end. The appendix was 6 inches long, considerably larger than normal, with several inches of blackened necrotic tissue at the tip. It was mere moments from rupturing. I felt a distinct chill of apprehension when I failed to locate the appendix in its accustomed place, Lipes later wrote in his report. This moment of crisis tested not only his medical knowledge, but his composure and leadership. Had he panicked or abandoned the search, Rector would certainly have died. Instead, he persevered, systematically exploring the abdominal cavity until he found the diseased organ. With steady hands, Lipes carefully freed the appendix, clamped it, and amputated the diseased organ. Following what he had observed during appendectomies at Philadelphia Naval Hospital, he tied off the stump and carefully closed each layer of tissue. As a final precaution against infection, he sprinkled sulfa powder, ground from tablets and baked in the ship's oven to kill any spores, into the wound. The use of sulfa powder exemplified Lipes's thorough approach to the procedure. Recognizing that infection posed the greatest post-operative risk in their environment, he had ground sulfa tablets into powder and heated them in the submarine's oven to ensure sterility. This level of foresight and preparation, thinking through each step of the procedure and anticipating potential complications, was remarkable for a young man with no formal surgical training. After 2.5 hours of intense concentration, the operation was complete. Rector was moved to the officers' quarters to recover, with Lipes maintaining a near-constant vigil. The young sailor regained consciousness about 30 minutes after surgery, and within days was showing remarkable improvement. The immediate post-operative period was perhaps the most anxious time for Lipes. With no antibiotics beyond sulfa powder, no blood for transfusion, and limited pain management options, complications could quickly become life-threatening. He monitored Rector's temperature, pulse, and respiration constantly, looking for any sign of infection or bleeding. He restricted the sailor to a liquid diet and administered what little pain medication was available. Throughout the submarine, the mood shifted from tense concern to cautious optimism, and then to outright celebration, as it became clear that Rector would survive. The Sea Dragon's radio man sent a tersely worded but triumphant message back to submarine headquarters. 1 merchant ship, 1 oil tanker, and 1 successful appendectomy. The message's deliberate understatement captured the submarine service's characteristic stoicism. Placing the medical achievement alongside battle successes emphasized that saving a shipmate's life was considered equivalent to fulfilling their combat mission, both essential aspects of a successful patrol. For the remainder of the patrol, Rector continued to recover steadily. Within a week, he was able to return to light duties, and by the time the Sea Dragon returned to port, he had resumed most of his normal activities. The men of the Sea Dragon regarded his recovery as nothing short of miraculous, a testament to Lipes's skill and the crew's collective determination to save their shipmate. When the Sea Dragon returned to Fremantle, Australia 6 weeks later, Rector was examined by the squadron medical officer, who pronounced him fully recovered and fit for duty. The appendix was preserved and analyzed, confirming Lipes' diagnosis and the imminence of rupture. Had the operation not been performed, Rector would have died within hours. Yet the reaction to Lipes' extraordinary achievement was far from uniformly positive. While Rear Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of the submarine force, praised the young pharmacist's mate for his courage and skill, others in the Navy medical establishment were outraged. The very idea of an enlisted corpsman performing surgery challenged the established medical hierarchy and threatened physician authority. Captain James Fife, Jr., the squadron commander, captured this ambivalence in his official comment. While this had a happy ending, it is hoped that Lipes's success on this occasion will not encourage others to take unnecessary risks. This cautionary response reflected the Navy's concern that Leipz's success might embolden other corpsmen to attempt procedures beyond their training. A legitimate worry given the life-or-death nature of surgical interventions. Yet it also revealed the inherent tension between the submarine force's culture of self-reliance and the medical establishment's emphasis on formal credentials and clear hierarchies. Most disturbing was the response from the Navy Surgeon General, Vice Admiral Ross T. McIntyre, who reportedly flew into a rage upon learning of the operation and even considered court-martialing Leipz for exceeding his authority. The idea that a high school dropout with limited medical training had successfully performed a complex surgical procedure struck at the very heart of medical professionals' identity and status. When Leipz returned to the United States, he encountered hostility from some medical officers. In one infamous incident, a junior medical corps reservist physically assaulted him aboard a submarine tender. Later, at Pearl Harbor, a medical corps captain severely dressed down another pharmacist's mate who had performed a similar emergency appendectomy, threatening him with court-martial until the submarine's commanding officer intervened. These reactions reflected deeper anxieties within the medical profession about the blurring of boundaries between physicians and non-physician providers, a tension that continues in various forms to this day. Doctors who had spent years in medical school and residency were understandably protective of their exclusive right to perform surgery. Yet the realities of combat sometimes demanded more flexible approaches to delivering care. When news of the submarine appendectomy reached the public through a Chicago Daily News article by war correspondent George Weller, however, Leipz became an instant hero. Weller's vivid account won him the Pulitzer Prize and transformed the young pharmacist's mate into a symbol of American ingenuity and courage at a time when the nation desperately needed such symbols. Weller's article, dramatically titled "Doc Leipz Commandeers a Submarine Officer's Wardroom," painted a compelling picture of the operation and its significance. "The most dramatic surgery in this global war was performed the other day on a submarine," he wrote. "It was done by a young pharmacist's mate with a minimum of tools." The story captivated readers across America, offering a rare piece of good news amid the grim reports from the Pacific Theater. The timing of Weller's article was significant. Published in December 1942, it appeared at a moment when American forces were still struggling to gain momentum against the Japanese. The tale of a young sailor saving his shipmate's life through resourcefulness and courage provided a perfect narrative of American exceptionalism, the belief that American ingenuity and determination could overcome any obstacle. In theaters across America, audiences cheered when they saw the submarine appendectomy dramatized in the 1943 Warner Brothers film Destination Tokyo, starring Cary Grant. The scene, while fictionalized, captured the incredible pressure and resourcefulness of Leipz's achievement. For a nation still reeling from Pearl Harbor and facing a long, uncertain war, the story offered hope that American determination and ingenuity would ultimately triumph. The film depicted a submarine surgeon performing an emergency appendectomy while the boat evaded depth charges, a dramatic embellishment of Leipz's actual experience. Yet, despite these Hollywood flourishes, the core message resonated. American submariners would do whatever was necessary to protect their own, facing down both enemy forces and the limitations of their environment with equal courage. The story was further immortalized in Ripley's Believe It or Not, cartoons, magazine articles, and radio programs. Leipz's operation became part of Navy lore, a story told and retold in wardrooms and naval hospitals across the fleet. For many Americans, it exemplified the can-do spirit that would eventually lead to victory in the Pacific. Despite his newfound fame, Leipz remained humble about his achievement, insisting that he had simply done what was necessary to save a shipmate. "Anyone with my training would have done the same thing," he often said, deflecting praise to the submarine community's culture of self-reliance and problem-solving. This modesty was characteristic of the World War II generation generally, and submariners specifically. The submarine service fostered an ethos of quiet professionalism, doing extraordinary things without seeking recognition. Lipes embodied this ethos, viewing his actions not as heroic, but as the fulfillment of his duty to his shipmates and his country. The impact of Lipes's operation extended far beyond a single life saved. In the months that followed, 2 more appendectomies were performed by pharmacists' mates aboard submarines: Thomas A. Moore on the USS Silversides in December 1942, and Harry B. Roby on the USS Grayback in January 1943. Both were successful, further demonstrating that, in the right circumstances, corpsmen could indeed perform complex medical procedures. Thomas Moore's operation aboard the Silversides took place on Christmas Eve, 1942, when Fireman Third Class George Platter developed appendicitis while the submarine was operating off Rabaul. Like Lipes, Moore had to improvise with limited equipment and no formal surgical training. The operation was successful, though Moore too faced criticism from medical officers upon his return. On the Grayback, Harry Roby performed his appendectomy while the submarine was submerged to avoid enemy aircraft. The patient was a Marine Corps observer who had been brought aboard to assist with reconnaissance. Despite the challenging conditions, Roby's operation was also successful, and the Marine recovered fully. These subsequent operations demonstrated that Lipes's success was not a fluke, but evidence of the high caliber of Navy corpsmen and the effectiveness of their training, even when applied to situations beyond their normal scope of practice. They also highlighted the submarine force's culture of adaptation and innovation in the face of extreme challenges. More importantly, Lipes's operation forced the Navy Medical Corps to reassess its approach to submarine medicine. Guidelines for emergency surgery were developed, and training for submarine corpsmen was expanded. By war's end, submarine tenders included surgical teams that could transfer to submarines for emergency procedures when possible. Medical kits aboard submarines were enhanced to include more surgical instruments and supplies. The Navy's Bureau of Medicine and Surgery, while initially resistant to acknowledging the legitimacy of Lipes's actions, eventually recognized the need for more comprehensive medical support for submarines on extended patrols. Formal protocols were established for when and how emergency surgeries could be performed, providing a framework that balanced medical standards with operational realities. These changes had lasting effects on naval medicine. The concept of independent duty medical personnel capable of providing advanced care in isolated environments evolved directly from the experiences of Lipes and his fellow corpsmen. Today's submarine independent duty corpsmen undergo extensive training that includes emergency surgical procedures, carrying forward the legacy of those World War II pioneers. For Darrell Dean Rector, the young sailor whose life Lipes had saved, the story ended tragically. He returned to duty and served aboard another submarine, the USS Tang. On October 24, 1944, during the Tang's 5th war patrol, a malfunctioning torpedo circled back and struck the submarine. Rector was among the 78 men lost when the Tang sank in the Taiwan Strait, one of the greatest submarine disasters of the war. The Tang's sinking was particularly heartbreaking because it occurred just as the submarine was completing one of the most successful patrols in naval history, having sunk 13 Japanese ships. The circular run of its final torpedo was a tragic fluke, a reminder of the constant dangers faced by submariners, even when everything seemed to be going right. Rector, having survived his appendicitis thanks to Lipes's skill, ultimately gave his life in service to his country. Lipes continued his naval career, eventually receiving a commission as an ensign in the Medical Service Corps in 1951. He retired as a lieutenant commander in 1962 and went on to a successful career in hospital administration. But despite his accomplishments, the shadow of that September morning in 1942 never left him. At medical conferences, colleagues would sometimes recognize his name from the famous Ripley's Believe It or Not cartoon that had immortalized his surgical feat. Throughout his civilian career, Lipes applied the lessons learned during his submarine service, the importance of preparation, the value of calm under pressure, and the necessity of innovation when resources are limited. As a hospital administrator in Corpus Christi, Texas, he was known for his practical approach to problem-solving and his emphasis on providing care even in challenging circumstances. Most disturbing to Lipes was that despite the lives saved and procedures improved because of his actions, the Navy never officially recognized his achievement. Decades passed, and the story of the submarine appendectomy became legend in naval medicine, but no formal acknowledgement came from the service he had served so faithfully. This oversight troubled not just Lipes, but many in the submarine and medical communities who recognized the significance of what he had accomplished. The absence of formal recognition seemed to perpetuate the initial resistance from the medical establishment, suggesting that innovation from outside traditional channels was still viewed with suspicion, even when it saved lives. That oversight was finally corrected in February 2005, when Wheeler B. Lipes, then 84 years old, received the Navy Commendation Medal for his actions aboard the Sea Dragon 63 years earlier. The ceremony, held at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, was one of the final acts of recognition for Lipes, who died of pancreatic cancer just 2 months later on April 17, 2005. The belated recognition came largely through the efforts of John Herman, historian of the Navy Medical Department, who had been fascinated by Lipes' story and disturbed by the lack of official acknowledgement. After locating Lipes and documenting his account in detail, Herman advocated persistently for formal recognition of the historic operation. The effort culminated in then Surgeon General of the Navy, Vice Admiral Michael Cowan, initiating the paperwork for Lipes' long-overdue commendation. At the award ceremony, Surgeon General Vice Admiral Donald Arthur praised Lipes' courageous and life-saving actions, noting that they exemplified the highest traditions of naval service. The commendation formally acknowledged what submariners had known for decades, that Lipes' operation represented not a violation of medical protocols, but an extraordinary act of courage and skill under the most challenging conditions imaginable. For Lipes, the recognition came just in time. Though weakened by cancer, he attended the ceremony with his family, receiving the medal with characteristic humility. "I've never thought of myself as a hero," he said. "I was just doing what needed to be done for a shipmate." 2 months later, he was laid to rest with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. In the years since World War II, the Navy has revolutionized its approach to submarine medicine. Today's submarines carry extensively trained independent duty corpsmen, sophisticated medical equipment, and telemedicine capabilities that allow shore-based physicians to guide emergency procedures. None of these advances would have been possible without the precedent set by Wheeler Lipes in that desperate moment beneath the South China Sea. Modern submarine medicine builds directly on the lessons learned from Lipes' operation and the subsequent procedures performed by Moore and Robbie. The emphasis on extensive training for independent duty corpsmen, the development of specialized medical kits for submarines, and the integration of telemedicine capabilities all reflect the recognition that submarines must be prepared to handle serious medical emergencies while operating independently for extended periods. Today's nuclear submarines, which can remain submerged for months at a time, face medical challenges similar to those encountered by the Sea Dragon's crew. While technology has advanced dramatically, the fundamental problem remains the same: how to provide comprehensive medical care in an isolated, confined environment, far from traditional medical facilities. The solutions developed by the modern submarine force build directly on the innovations pioneered by Lipes and his contemporaries. Perhaps the most significant legacy of Lipes' operation was its influence on the development of the Navy's Independent Duty Corpsman, IDC program. Today's IDCs undergo extensive training that includes emergency surgical procedures, advanced diagnostic techniques, and comprehensive medical management. They are among the most highly qualified enlisted medical professionals in any military service, capable of providing a level of care that would have seemed unimaginable in Leip's time. As the Sea Dragon cruised silently through enemy waters in September 1942, a young pharmacist's mate with limited formal education but extraordinary courage made a decision that would save a life and change military medicine forever. His makeshift operating room with bent spoons and kitchen implements stands as a testament to the principle that innovation often comes not from advanced technology or elaborate facilities, but from human ingenuity and determination. In that moment, Leipz embodied the best traditions of the submarine service and of American medicine. He faced an impossible situation with calm resolve, drew on his training and observation, and improvised solutions to problems that no one had anticipated. In doing so, he not only saved Rector's life, but established a precedent that would influence submarine medicine for generations. Leipz's operation embodied the submarine service motto, non sibi sed patriae, not for self, but for country. When asked years later about the pressure he felt during those 2.5 hours in the wardroom, Leipz offered a simple response that captured the essence of duty and service. I never thought about failing. I only thought about what would happen to Rector if I didn't try. This attitude reflected not just Leipz's personal courage, but the ethos of the entire submarine community, a willingness to attempt the seemingly impossible rather than abandon a shipmate to certain death. It was this spirit that carried the submarine force through the darkest days of the war and ultimately contributed significantly to America's victory in the Pacific. The lesson of Wheeler-Leipz's extraordinary operation transcends its historical moment. It reminds us that sometimes saving lives requires breaking with convention. Sometimes rules must be challenged when human need demands it. And sometimes the most meaningful innovations come not from advanced research laboratories, but from ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances with nothing but courage, knowledge, and improvisation as their tools. In medical education today, Leipz's story serves as a powerful example of the principles of crisis medicine, the ability to adapt, improvise, and overcome limitations to deliver care when standard resources are unavailable. His operation demonstrates that while formal training and proper equipment are invaluable, the fundamental qualities of medical excellence, careful observation, methodical thinking, and unwavering commitment to the patient's survival, can transcend material limitations. For military medicine specifically, the legacy of Leipz's operation has been profound. It exemplified the concept of austere medicine, providing care in environments where standard medical facilities are unavailable. This concept has influenced not just submarine medicine, but military medicine broadly, informing approaches to battlefield care, special operations medicine, and disaster response. Wheeler-Leipz never sought recognition for what he did that September day. He simply saw a problem, a dying shipmate, and found a solution using the tools at hand. In doing so, he exemplified the very best of the American military tradition: initiative, resourcefulness, and unflinching courage in the face of impossible odds. As Lieutenant Commander Farrall wrote in his after-action report, pharmacist mate Leipz demonstrated a coolness and skill that would have been a credit to any surgeon. His performance was in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. Today, as modern submarines patrol beneath the world's oceans with sophisticated medical facilities and highly trained personnel, they carry with them the legacy of Wheeler-Leipz, a reminder that in the most desperate circumstances, human ingenuity and courage can accomplish the seemingly impossible. The next time you hear someone claim that rules can never be broken, remember the story of a 23-year-old corpsman who faced an impossible choice 120 feet beneath the South China Sea. Remember how he broke those rules to save a life, and in doing so, forever changed how the Navy approaches medical care in isolated environments. His story reminds us that sometimes the most profound acts of courage involve not charging into enemy fire, but simply refusing to accept the inevitable, choosing instead to attempt the impossible against overwhelming odds. In medicine, as in war, such courage can mean the difference between life and death. Would you have broken those rules or followed them? Would you have attempted the impossible or accepted the inevitable? Wheeler Lipes made his choice, and that choice echoes through naval history to this day. Share this story of courage and innovation so others will remember what real heroism looks like, not always on the battlefield, but sometimes in the quiet determination of those who refuse to accept that some lives cannot be saved.